Hi everyone, and welcome back to our podcast for the EFWU, that's the Equality for Workers Union, and I'd like to give a very warm welcome to all our members and potential members. Our union's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and today I'm going to be interviewing Erin, who is an intern, or was an intern for our union. Just briefly for an intern, I mean, some of you may not know what an intern is. It's a student or trainee who works sometimes without pay. I think you worked without pay, didn't you,
For
Erin?
a short period.
For a short period, yeah. In order to gain work experience or satisfy requirements for a qualification. Erin's been qualified for 2 years now, haven't you, Erin? So I've got a number of questions that I'm going to ask Erin, and hopefully she'll be able to answer them. So as I say, she was a former intern for the EFWU. She worked very closely with Mizan, our General Secretary, and Imran, and that was during the formative stages when the union was first being formed. Erin played a unique and crucial role with the union, not only assisting in building the union's foundation, but also representing members. So she was out there representing members and engaging directly with management. Today we'll hear about her journey, what she learned and how it has shaped her path, including her current role in law. So, Erin, for the first question, I'd like to thank you for joining us, first of all, today. Let's begin with your time at the EFWU. How did your journey begin with the union?
Yeah, so thanks for having me. And really, I think from memory, I was in the second year of university. I was doing my law degree, and I was looking to gain some more experience. So I wanted something else on my CV. I was looking for an internship. And at the time, a lot of law firms didn't really offer that. So there wasn't really much out there by way of an ongoing internship. Actually, it was on conversation with my mum. She still is and works in O2 retail. And Mizan was her union representative prior to him starting EFWU when he worked at CWU. And my mum actually thought to get in touch with him, and she knew he'd started his own union, and she thought, there's still some legal experience there and it might be helpful. So my mum had got in touch with Mizan, and I met up with him for a coffee in Leeds. And the rest is history, really. I started an internship. I think I did about 3 months, maybe unpaid internship, and it eventually moved into a paid role with the union. And I worked there for about 3 or 4 years, I think.
Yeah, and it's unusual as well for an internship to be with a trade union. How did you find it?
Absolutely brilliant. Yeah, so brilliant. I think the experience that I gained there was so varied, and it's really helped in my career now, really. So it was certainly unique, but a great experience, definitely.
Yeah. So what did you move on to after you'd done the internship with the union?
Yeah.
Is it a private company that you're working for now?
Yeah, so I'm qualified as a solicitor now. I work for a law firm in Leeds.
Yep.
I actually still do work with trade unions, and I also work with private individuals. And I'm a qualified employment solicitor, so deal with employment claims every day.
Brilliant. Okay then. So you supported Imran and Mizan in building the union. What was it like being involved from the ground up?
Yeah, so I've got really fond memories of that, and really at the start, I think we maybe only had a few 100 members, and we were looking to gain 1,000 members. And when I started, and that was what we were looking to do. The three of us, I can remember working on Saturdays together, and we'd be handwriting membership cards and posting them out, and we'd be entering membership details into just a normal Excel spreadsheet, which obviously will be completely different now, but we were really learning on the job, really, and seeing how we wanted the union to progress. But we had a great time, and we spent a lot of time together trying to build it, so it was excellent.
Yeah, a lot of hard work. So what were some of the key things that you learned while you worked for the EFWU?
At first, my role was really admin, and it could be doing anything really, but eventually it moved on into a trade union representative role. So certainly with employment law, when I started, obviously I was doing my law degree, but I hadn't done a lot of employment law at that stage. So by the time I moved on to being a representative, my employment law knowledge was so much better than when I started. And I think really key was the interpersonal skills and building on that. Because I was only, I think, about 20 or 21 when I started with the union. So I hadn't really had that experience of dealing with members or management, and those interpersonal skills, I think, were the key thing really in building the confidence to speak with people.
So it was really, you were thrown in at the deep end, would you say?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, definitely.
Because I remember I did the training course, and we spoke about that earlier, about 7 years ago, and I vaguely remember the course. But that was the start of the employment law.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So how would you describe your development both professionally and personally during your time there, with the EFWU?
Yeah, so I think I started off probably quite shy, I think, maybe, and certainly nervous it was completely new, and actually I didn't have a great knowledge of trade unions when I started working for them. So it was really learning everything, a completely new challenge. But in that time, not only admin and things like that, I hadn't actually worked in an admin role previously either. So all of that side of things certainly developed all of those skills. Legal knowledge. And I mean, by the time that I left, I was advocating for members, which was brilliant. And I'd never expected my role to turn into that. And I didn't expect to be confident at doing that either. So by the time I left, I think I was a new person almost.
How long did you work for the union then?
I think it was about 3 or 4 years.
4 years.
Yeah, it feels like a long time ago now, but of course it wasn't that long ago.
What was it like interacting and negotiating with management on behalf of union members?
It could be really tricky, and I think when I first started attending meetings with members, I was really nervous. Obviously, I was really young as well, and there was that concern. I thought, I'm not going to be taken seriously because I was, 21, 22, and a lot of management hadn't dealt with union reps, or they certainly hadn't dealt with union reps that were potentially quite young as well. So I was worried about that, and a lot of management obviously don't necessarily like being questioned on the working practices. So sometimes the response that you got wasn't necessarily a warm one. But I also dealt with some management that were wanting to engage with the union and certainly wanting to assist with trying to make the workplace better. So it was a mixed experience, definitely. Yeah.
Did you get a lot of hostility or?
Occasionally, I wouldn't say every meeting was hostile, because I think some of the workplaces were used to dealing with trade unions, and certainly I think it will depend on the sort of case that you're dealing with as well. If you're dealing with an absence process, generally probably not very hostile. Potentially, if you're dealing with a disciplinary process, it might be that management are more hostile in that regard, depending on the circumstances.
So through your time with the EFWU, what did you come to understand about the importance of trade unions? And was your perception of trade unions different to the reality when you did start working for the union and being out there and representing members?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think my perception of trade unions prior to starting with the EFWU was really that they'd strike, and that was what I thought they did. I didn't necessarily, I knew that they would attend meetings with members, but I didn't necessarily understand what they were there for. And I think I came to understand that it's for employers and trade unions to collectively work together and try and make the workplace better. And I think that's really important. I think potentially a lot of younger people, there's not a lot of education now. I remember at university, I did very briefly touched on trade unions, but I didn't really understand what they were there for. So my perception was completely changed when I started working at EFWU and I realised what work they did. So
yeah, it's not something you learn at school. It's not on the curriculum or anything like that, is it? So why do you think young people are hesitant or unaware of the benefits of joining a trade union?
Again, I just think that there's not maybe education there about what trade unions are for, and I think it should be looked at as insurance, and having that protection in place. A lot of the time people are really lucky and they may not ever need to use a trade union, or they may only use a trade union once in their working career. Or that could be the difference between keeping your job or not. So it's having that in place just in case, the same as if you have home insurance in place. I think it's really important that people understand that they're there to try and make your workplace better, and make it a happier place to work.
Yeah, and I think you're right on the things that you're saying there. When you do ask members, or we go out leafleting and try and getting people to join the union. We're active, but sometimes they'll say, I don't need a union. I get on well with my manager. They've got an open door policy. But I say to them, what would you say? What would you do if they turn around to you and said, we're going to let you go, basically sack? They won't say we're going to sack you. And they say, we'll go to a solicitor, but they wouldn't. But you're dead right there. What you're saying is it's an insurance for your job. And the price for the union at £6.99 a month is a cheap policy, but with very good representation. Okay then, so how do you think this experience shaped you or others who've been through similar roles?
So from working at the trade union, I realised straight away that I'd want to continue into employment law. So I carried on. I did my postgraduate and my legal practice course. I still worked at the union at the same time. But I always wanted to do employment, and I did employment on my LPC. I chose that as one of my electives. And then once I finished my LPC, I went on to work for a firm that deals particularly with trade unions. And I also then specialised in employment law, and that's what I've qualified into ultimately. And I've never changed that. As soon as I started doing employment law, I got hooked on it, and I didn't want it to do anything else. And I did some other things during my time while I was doing my training contract, but I always knew that my interest was in employment.
Right, okay. So could you speak to the legal side? What does the law say about the rights to representation, and why is it so critical to have union support in formal meetings?
So the right to be accompanied, essentially, it will apply to grievance meetings and disciplinary hearings. And you can have, if you're not a member of a trade union, you could have a colleague. You can also have a trade union rep, even if you're not a member of a trade union, which I think some people don't realise. But otherwise, you can have a trade union rep or a colleague with you. And I think it is really important to be prepared if you go into these meetings, because a lot of people, if you get invited to a disciplinary, it's a very stressful experience, and people aren't used to being put in those situations in everyday life. And if you're fighting for your job, I think it's really important that you have someone that's used to doing that day in and day out, and that's what they deal with, because you can get to these meetings and you're under so much pressure. You might not advocate for yourself in the best way. So if you have a union rep there with you, if you've missed anything out, then don't worry, because your union rep will be able to sum that up for you at the end. Especially
if you've been trained in employment law.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think it's important to stress as well that your company, your organisation cannot stop you from joining a trade union. You've got a legal right to join a trade union, and you don't have to inform your employer that you're a member of a trade union. Were there any memorable or particularly challenging cases that stuck with you during your time with the EFWU?
Yes. So one that I've always remembered, and I think I've taken it with me in my career really, is that I had one member and he was being bullied by his manager. His mental health was really, really suffering, and as a result, he'd had a long time off work. He wanted to return to work, but this manager was still there. He'd complained about it. And when I met up with him for sort of a pre-meet, he was having an absence review meeting, and I'd met up with him and I could see how much he was struggling, and it can be quite upsetting to see that. And ultimately, we ended up getting no further action, and he continued. Eventually, they changed the way that he was working, so he didn't have to work with that manager, and he was able to return to work. And that's always stuck by me, because I think, work is such a key part of everyone's life, and I trained for years to be a solicitor, and I know how much it means to me. So to not be able to go to work and feel so upset every day and not want to return, that really stuck with me.
Okay then, so Erin, from your experience, did you see patterns like how certain communities, perhaps BAME workers, were disproportionately sanctioned or treated? And do you want to explain what BAME workers are as well?
Yeah, so when we're talking about BAME workers, we're going to be looking at Black, Asian, minority, ethnic workers. It's certainly a very topical question, and I think it's very difficult with race discrimination claims, particularly because a lot of employers will not do it overtly. So it's going to be generally very covert. You'll not get a lot of workplaces where there's name calling, racist comments generally. Not saying it doesn't happen, because it certainly does. But the way in which race discrimination presents itself often is very covert, and it can be difficult to pick out for that reason. It might be a feeling, for example, and that's sometimes difficult to evidence. And race discrimination is certainly very prevalent in workplaces, but they can just be sometimes more difficult to pick out. If you look at tribunal statistics, for example, disability discrimination tends to be more prevalent in workplaces, and it's often, it's more easily to identify that because you may be looking at a failure to make reasonable adjustments, and that's often easier to see. But it's one of those things that unfortunately it's still very present in workplaces.
Yeah, but it can be difficult. It is difficult to evidence. And I think the advice that we give is that, if you're in that position, you are being bullied, you are being victimised for any reason whatsoever. The advice is keep a diary. Keep a diary of events, the day, the date, the time, what happened, if there were any witnesses, if anybody, witnessed anything. But that's what we'd say to our members, keep a diary, and that is evidence, and that helps.
Yeah, that's really great advice. And certainly in my role now, I understand the importance of that. And it's often, sometimes people don't realise until it's too late and they haven't necessarily got that record. And that's really key. And that's going to be, the building blocks of any case, really.
Yeah. And it helps you in your job to represent the member, obviously, because you've got something there. If somebody is being bullied, the person that's bullying them, they don't keep a record of events, but you've got that evidence there that helps you, build a case. You've since moved to start your legal training. Can you tell us about your training contract and what you're doing now, basically, what you're doing as a job now?
Yeah, so I started working at a law firm. I started off as a legal assistant, or paralegal, as it's known at some other firms. And within a year, I'd been offered a training contract. I started my training contract the following year, and I did a mixture of things. So I did employment, which was obviously what I'd started working in employment anyway there. So I did 6 months of employment. I did some personal injury, which is really interesting. I also did a little bit of dispute, and also assisted the family team, but ultimately ended up qualifying into employment law, and that was always my preference. So now I'm almost 2 years qualified, and day to day I might be doing private work, I might be assisting trade unions, might be doing things like settlement agreements. Often unions will come to us and ask for advice on their members' cases. So they might have dealt with them through the disciplinary process, for example, and eventually they might have been dismissed, in which case I'll maybe look at the case and give advice on the prospects of any claims that they may have. Or it might be that we lodge tribunal claims and we look to litigate and see whether we can recover compensation for individuals that have, might be discrimination claims, it might be unfair dismissal, might be wages, unpaid holiday, things like that. It's really, really varied work, which I think is why I like employment so much. It's brilliant.
Yeah, no two cases are the same. Yeah. So how does your current work in employment law contrast with your experience in the trade union space? You've sort of answered some of this question already, haven't you?
Yeah, well, obviously I've continued on to working with trade unions, so it's very similar in that the union will have supported the member all the way through, and eventually it might land on my desk. It might be that, we need to look at legal support now, in which case it might end up with me, and I can review it, and we can maybe proceed to tribunal. So yeah, it's very similar, but just further along the process often.
So, Erin, have there been any recent updates in employment law you think workers, and especially young people, should know about?
Yeah, so it's going to be really, really key to keep an eye out on what happens with the Employment Rights Bill. So we're going to start seeing changes really in the next year, 2 years' time. And really, this is going to be key, and it's hopefully going to make workplaces a lot better. We're going to be looking at things like the qualifying period for unfair dismissal changing, which is going to be a really, really significant change. So I'd suggest that everyone really stays on top with the changes that are going to be implemented, really.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so, well, finally, I'd like to say thank you, Erin, for coming along and sharing your journey. It's been incredible hearing about your experience with the EFWU and how it shaped your path into employment law. Before we close, do you have any final words of advice for young people considering union involvement or a career in employment rights?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And I think my advice would be to be authentic, be yourself, and don't try and, law can be very competitive, and certainly, your interpersonal skills, I think, are the most important things, really. It's especially in employment, you're going to be dealing with people from all backgrounds, you're going to be dealing with different workplaces, different individuals, and being able to be approachable and being your authentic self, I think is really important.
Yeah, that's good advice. That's good advice. Well, thank you very much, and thank you to all our members and potential members for listening in to this podcast, and we will be having many more in the future. Thanks again, Erin.
Thank you.